Thanks for joining us for our talk about protest art. My name is Philip and this is Helen. We are both independent artists working to expose and challenge the normalisation of animal exploitation through our art. Alongside our own work, we volunteer for an international vegan art collective named the Art of Compassion Project, founded in 2014 by Lee Sanders, an artist living in Spain. The project uses art with a vegan message to raise funds for charities working for animals across the globe. To date, the group has held art exhibitions, all run by volunteers, in the UK and US, all over Europe and even in China, and donated almost £18,000 to over 50 different vegan-run sanctuaries and non-profits. Among multiple other projects, our artists have contributed work to an amazing coffee table book of vegan art, the first of its kind to be published, with 180 eclectic animal rights artworks. We'll be showing our 25th art exhibition at the Vegan Free Festival in Birmingham next month with VegFest UK.
So protest art is really just any form of creativity which speaks out in opposition to injustice, often using a defiant language both as resistance and in solidarity with the subject. This was just a little screenshot from a search engine, and you can find so much of it online. Of course, governments understand that creativity is dangerous, which is why, in the UK anyway, creativity and critical thinking aren't taught in schools because they know we'll use it against them. Protest art aims to educate, to encourage empathy and promote critical thinking, which compels the viewer to question the status quo. Almost all social and political justice movements throughout history have used art in some form as a vital part of their fight, and it's a perfect example of non-violent protest. We've compiled a really brief overview for you today of art which has inspired and galvanised people across all socio-economic backgrounds to come together for a cause. So in the 15th century, the invention of the mechanical printing press was the beginning of a revolution in society, with the sharing of knowledge through mass reproduction of texts and artworks. By the 19th century, printed works were giving a voice to those oppressed under the ravages of capitalism and so-called democracy, and these words and images were seen as propaganda and a threat to power, which of course is the same today. Traditional artists such as Francisco Goya, Edouard Manet and Pablo Picasso have long used their skills to protest against war. Picasso's iconic painting, Guernica, speaks of the horrors of the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. And it still serves as an incredibly powerful damnation of the devastation of war around the world. There's a tapestry replica hanging in the United Nations building in New York. And it was covered by a curtain in 2003, just before the televised announcement that America planned to invade Iraq. UN officials denied that they were hiding the artwork, claiming that it just made a bad backdrop for their TV cameras. But since Guernica is a clear anti-war statement, it seemed obvious that censoring it spoke of a tacit admission of guilt and shame on the part of the American administration. In a critique of this event, Guernica was referred to as an inconvenient masterpiece, which really demonstrates the enduring power of protest art.
The early 1900s saw posters by the Artists' Suffrage League widely distributed, speaking of the inequalities faced by women of the day, and artwork was a very meaningful part of these protests. At the same time, these outspoken women were the force behind the growing animal welfare groups, protesting vivisection and other animal welfare issues, which we will cover later. Of course, this was all tied up with patriarchy and capitalism, but that is a whole separate presentation. In 1964, Martin Luther King called songs the soul of the movement, and in the decades-long fight for civil rights, music was the backdrop, a rallying cry which became a living legacy, galvanizing people on a community level where everyone could contribute as well as participate. Songwriters came together in solidarity with black artists like Billie Holiday, Nina Simone and Sam Cooke telling their personal stories of racial injustice through song, while white artists like Bob Dylan and Peter Seeger stood as allies with their own protest songs. In a period of social unrest in 1960s and 70s Britain, the punk music scene erupted as a loud and anarchic voice against issues such as capitalism, fascism, racism, and animal use. Many vegans today cite that scene as their springboard, not only into living vegan, but also into cultural activism. In rejecting consumer society, the ethos of punk fostered the do-it-yourself spirit, akin to the musicians of the civil rights movement. It wasn't just the music that was focused on social issues. Many bands such as Crass, Flux of Pink Indians, and Conflict discussed the topics at their gigs and included artwork and information on additional resources within their record sleeves. We love this quote from Joe Strummer of The Clash in 1976, which says it all. We're anti-fascist, we're anti-violence, we're anti-racist, and we're pro-creative.
As punk screamed on into the 1980s, the iconic work of the Silence Equals Death collective and the bold and bright AIDS awareness art of Keith Haring in his work Silence Equals Death became a call out for the urgent need for discussion, education and action on the AIDS crisis. Peter Kennard is the UK's first and only professor of political art, and since the 1970s he's been responsible for some of our most powerful and influential images of resistance and dissent. Addressing dire emergencies such as climate change, austerity under capitalism and the evils of war, from Vietnam right up to the present conflicts in Ukraine and the Gulf states, his images have been seen around the world in newspapers, books and as protest posters. And Peter Kennard states, profit masks poverty, racism, war, climate, catastrophe, and on. My aim is to unmask the connection. The British artist, anonymous British artist known as Getting Up to Stuff, uses his skills to create public art in Bristol. Bear With Me was created in aid of a suicide prevention charity, addressing the fact that 75% of all suicides are male, and this sculpture encourages adults to reach out for help, just as a child would instinctively reach out for comfort. There was a huge response to this public art, and the artist said that he stopped counting after 250,000 responses.
Here and Now was an anti-slavery installation in front of a controversial statue of a well-known slave trader from the late 1660s. Small-scale bodies were laid out on the ground in the same design as a 17th century diagram of a ship carrying slaves from the African continent, but with contemporary labels added, showing examples of current female servitude, examples of modern slavery and sexism. And incidentally, the statue it was in front of, Edward Colston, is the one that ended up at the bottom of Bristol Harbour and is now its own work of art because they put it in the Bristol Museum on its side covered in graffiti. Yeah. So they left it exactly as it was, so it's become its own protest art in the museum. Yeah. 1,000 Times in an Instant was an installation in Trafalgar Square, London, in 2024 by Mexican artist Teresa Margolez. Based on the iconic skull rack that features in the culture of ancient Mesoamerica, it consisted of cast moulds taken directly from the faces of 726 transgender people from Mexico and the UK. Each one an individual mask, hair and skin cells included, stuck to the plaster. Intended as a statement against the violence and prejudice faced by transgender individuals, it was designed to corrode in the open air. The rain and humidity of the London weather accelerated the inevitable deterioration of the art, a reference to the fragility of human life, human rights, and personal freedom. In 2017, an image was displayed on a huge billboard in Phoenix, Arizona, depicting Donald Trump, trigger warning, obviously there, flanked by nuclear mushroom clouds and Nazi swastika dollar bill signs. Created by artist and activist Karen Fiorito, who we're proud to say is a member of the Art of Compassion Project, this satirical image commented directly on Trump's dangerous, authoritarian and fascist behaviour.
More trigger warning.
Yeah.
He's back.
Oh, God.
We're really glad to say that Karen produced another scathing piece of art, which replaced that one in 2025. And this new impossible to ignore billboard showed an image of, you know who, crowned, topless and sunken in a swamp. In one hand, a gold cell phone. In the other, a tiny green tank. a Tesla Cybertruck daubed with a swastika sinks into the toxic swamp, whilst a mushroom cloud, in a cheeky nod to the earlier billboard, rises over an alligator wearing a MAGA cap. And Karen stated that her latest visual attack on the president is inspired by, she says, the level of damage and chaos Donald Trump has levied on all aspects of the US government and American life during his first 6 months, which actually seems like nothing compared to what he's done since. So back in the UK, in a former scrapyard in Somerset called Rockaway Park, now it's a radical space for alternative creatives. The venue presents music and film. It's got art studios, craft markets, and a really amazing vegan cafe. Protest art is in evidence all across the site, some using subvertising, which is to spoof, parody, or satirise corporate or political advertisements. And this art subverts the advertiser's intention, usually with humour, but also with bitterness and anger. With a strong ethos of reusing and repurposing, this community of creatives for whom collaboration is key suggests to the visitor that there is a different way of doing things, a way to live better. The public art on show at Rockaway is a connecting force full of visual statements which are a call to arms and a raised fist against injustices.
Social media plays a huge part in modern protest, with Instagram being the ideal platform for sharing protest art. We've picked out just a couple of examples. Flyers for Palestine is a Belgium-based initiative spreading awareness about the long history and ongoing occupation of Palestine. This is an incredible resource where anyone around the world can submit work, and the huge archive of posters are freely available to download, print and use. Most of the work is extremely moving and compelling, with much of it being created and posted in real time, while the artists and their families suffer daily under the occupation. This is just a small sample of the artwork. Just Seeds Artist Cooperative is a US-based, decentralized network of 41 artists committed to social, environmental, and political engagement. They offer a huge catalogue of downloadable graphics, which they term an activist's toolbox, free for non-commercial projects and covering a diverse collection of issues. This, again, is just a small snapshot of what they produce. So, our movement clearly has a fantastic and very long history of protest art to take inspiration from. Most of the issues we've discussed so far can be addressed with the collaboration of the oppressed themselves, but when we're working for non-human animals, it's not possible to get their consent on how to exactly frame our allyship with them. We need to be mindful of how we represent them and their lived experiences, so it's important to focus on who they are and to ensure we're making work which amplifies their voices. These pieces from Twyla Francois illustrate that perfectly. There are some challenges with making art for animals. The way animals have traditionally been represented in art, as metaphors and symbols or with sentimentality rather than empathy, has normalized our use of them for generations. Traditional animal art divests itself of all responsibility towards who it refers to as the subject, invariably representing them as an object. Their likeness and their stories are, of course, always used without their consent, so the least we can do is render them truthfully, as multidimensional beings with rich emotional lives, and to ensure we always preserve their inherent dignity. J. Kerry Cronin said in her brilliant book, Art for Animals, "We need a more nuanced understanding of how any given image is made, used, and circulated in an activist context, and we need always to be mindful that visual representations have real-life consequences for living, breathing animals." We are continuously bombarded from birth with images which objectify animals and displace them from their lived realities. The way most societies see non-human animals is largely through engagement with visual culture, for example, through our first children's books, through TV and movies, and through advertising. These adverts are vintage, but the message is still echoed in our culture today. Their bodies are visually marketed by the industries who use them, with lies specifically designed to hide the individual, in order to appeal to our cultural need to believe that all is well. So, perhaps the biggest challenge to our advocacy is that our narrative of anti-speciesism lays bare humanity's biggest fear, that we are not really superior beings after all.
So, in order to amplify their voices, it's important to know our subject in depth and speak of individuals rather than numbers. It can be key to that. Interpreting their needs and desires with empathy is essential for us to represent them with integrity. We should check that we're working in solidarity with them while avoiding the narrative that we're speaking for them, and crucially, decentering the human in that narrative. It's also vitally important that we're not further exploiting, othering, undermining, or fetishizing the individual, and that our language is always liberation and abolition, never welfare or focusing on the cruelty, which suggests that there's a right way to do the wrong thing. And of course, we also need to assure that we're not demeaning other oppressed groups or using comparisons in a harmful manner in order to make our point. We just don't need to do it. The animals' lived experiences are enough for that to be our focus. So we have to think about who our audience is, and of course that's ever-shifting. Just as we're inspired by the art which helped to change cultural biases in the past, we can know that the art that we're making now, hopefully, becomes part of that process for those following in our footsteps. It can be challenging to find the right tone, but sometimes a good point is to remember that our audience is just us before we were vegan. We can all remember where we sat on these difficult issues before something triggered a change in us. So we can tap into that, what worked and what didn't along our journeys to here. Most important is to just practice empathy with who our audience is. We have to make sure that the artwork translates. Does it step out into the real world, both outside the niche of animal rights and outside the quite exclusive and abstract niche of commercial art? The animals can't afford for our art to be so abstract or neutral that it only speaks to us. And that's why protest art throughout history has often been quite direct and unapologetic. And Suko's work, which I'm sure most of you know, is a really good example of this. It's okay if sometimes our art does shock. After all, it comes from witnessing the shocking reality that's widely accepted in society. And sometimes if we want people to be outraged by what's happening to other animals, we do need to act that way ourselves.
Art as a storyteller has always been really important to us culturally, so activists can use that same culture to flip the harmful narratives around our fellow animals, to unveil those deliberately hidden truths. This means we need to make very careful choices on how we tell these crucial stories, with honesty and empathy, and to make the ordinary seem uncomfortable, though not so much that it simply turns eyes away. An artist's imagination, combined with knowledge of the subject, can elevate and expand the narrative, giving it context, meaning, and above all, truth. A truth which Helen aims to achieve here in her series of work based on the well-used images of cuts of flesh. So, whether it's an illustration, a poem, a song, or a street installation, the ordinariness of that subject can be subverted, coaxing or even jolting the viewer out of their comfort zone. This exquisite little illustrated book by our friend Bridget Irving is a touching retelling of the classic Little Red Riding Hood. I won't give away the story, but it stands as a perfect example of how to gently make people think differently about our relationships with our fellow animals. A few more examples. Frances Power Cobb was an anti-vivisection activist in the 19th century. She created illustrated leaflets using reproductions of Landseer's noble and beloved dogs, combined with images from scientific papers describing to students how to perform tests on live and conscious dogs. The shocking visual imbalance was simple and truthful and asked the viewer to rethink our relations with animals. We can't talk about animal rights and not mention Sue Coe. Her intensely graphic illustrations, like the one we showed earlier, have been an inspiration for many of us, and since the 1970s she has focused on exposing the role of capitalism's influence on animal use industries. She has published several books, some examples on the slides here, and her incredible body of work has supporters worldwide. Coe is the epitome of a prolific artist, addressing a vast range of political issues as well as an ever-growing portfolio of animal rights work. Her work is often brutal and straight to the point, and it's well worth checking out her social media as she posts new work frequently. The singer-songwriter Jen Armstrong, who records under the name Vegan Queen V, and I know she's out here, yeah, she's in the audience, is a successful animal rights singer. She addresses environmental and agricultural issues in her songs, but despite these heavyweight topics, she creates memorable melodies combined with poetic lyrics, making her music accessible and appealing, despite the hard-hitting message. She's now working with Sue Joyce and the Animal Rights Choir, who are here this weekend.
Join us.
Woo, join them.
Join them. Like music, poetry can be a powerful art form, both spoken and in written word. Gretchen Primack addresses, with often heartbreaking clarity, some of the tough issues of animal use in her gorgeous collection, Kind. Based in New York State, Gretchen has been a union organiser, a working women's advocate, and a teacher in prisons for many years. In recognising that incarcerated humans experience similar rights violations to other animals, her collection Visiting Days, which is set in a men's maximum security prison, is written with the same empathy and compassion as her animal rights work. Humour has traditionally always worked well to point out our hypocrisies, none so well as Vegan Sidekick, whose satirical comics brilliantly point out the absurdity of defending animal use. They have a freely shared folder on their website where anyone can access the comics and use them. Temporary or ephemeral art is widely used for animal rights, and it can be seen as vegan chalking on pavements, pasting of posters and flyers, murals and street art, or temporary illustrations. Colombian stencil artist Praxis addresses the full range of animal liberation and anti-speciesist issues on the streets of New York and Los Angeles. This is obviously our favourite on this side, and a big shout out to Camp Beagle, who are having a protest event outside the gates of MBR Acres today, so I hope that's going well for them. In 2022, Praxis curated a billboard project with a Brooklyn-based NGO called Save Art Space, and these giant images spent a whole month in a very public space, and with Philip's own work being perfectly positioned above a place which sold animal flesh. It's actually called Dinosaur Barbecue, which is just such a great name. Fred Brown is a legend. He makes stunning protest sand art on beaches in the UK, highlighting the multitude of interlinked social issues the world faces under capitalism, and he regularly focuses on themes of veganism and animal rights. Just Wondering is a small collective of 3 individuals based in Romania. Their short animated essays are both thoughtful and thought-provoking, and you can find them all available on their YouTube channel. With their beautiful narration and their exquisite animations, these essays are a compelling call for critical thought around subjects including anti-speciesism and environmental justice. And they released this beautiful film that I don't know if any of you have seen a few months ago, titled Straying Home, which poses the question, what would it take to coexist more justly with urban animals? We really recommend seeking them out.
To bring things right up to date, we've got 2 examples of contemporary art activism which have emerged in the last few months. One from a seasoned activist and the other very new to the cause. Gem da Silva has produced something which is rare in the world of using creativity for animal rights. As an activist with over 3 decades of undercover investigation behind him, Gem has taken slices of soundscape, lifted from his countless hours of undercover footage, to create an astonishing work of sonic art in collaboration with Canadian experimental artist Gnostic Front. Titled Industry Standard, Gem describes this new work, launched in January this year, as a listening project, another way of bearing witness which perfectly complements his other work. This is from his website. Industry Standard invites audiences to slow down and become ear witnesses. It is a tool for empathy, exposure, and reflection, and can be used for outreach, education, exhibition, and activism. Gem states that his journey to animal rights began through the culture of music, and specifically 1980s punk. Hence, his nod to that era by releasing the project on vinyl, as well as for download. He is here this weekend, so we'd strongly advise chasing him up to chat about this extraordinary work and how he's getting it out there into people's ears. I know he's in the audience. There he is there.
There he is.
Blushing. Yeah, well, you started it. Last but definitely not least is Lara Betts. At just 17, she's the freshest face in this world of animal rights protest art. In September last year, Lara reached out to me with a request to interview me about my own work and for some advice on painting techniques. 6 months on, Lara has produced some beautiful artwork, initially basing her work on a piece of mine. She has found her confidence and evolved into creating original works in a variety of mediums. Her fresh take on my 2015 piece, See How They Grow, with human babies representing Holstein calves, actually inspired me to create a new painting myself in that same series, proof that inspiration can work both ways. As a vegan, Lara has of course experienced isolation from her peer group, plus her tutor has found her ideas behind her work challenging. I think we can all empathise with how this very talented and ethically astute teenager has, to her credit, brought uncompromising ideas into a very mainstream space. I was 44 years old when I painted my first animal rights picture. Lara was 16. With the skills she has and her enthusiasm for the cause, I foresee a very bright future for this very active activist.
So all of these examples probably leave you with the thought, well, I'm not an artist. But the good news is that art is accessible to everybody, and using your creativity for a cause is only limited by your imagination. We hope the examples we've shown today help you to think about how to use art, either your own, if you're an artist, or in collaboration with others in your advocacy. Joy in the face of adversity is an act of resistance in itself. In these times of extreme uncertainty and fear, it becomes even more imperative to creatively resist alongside our fellow animals, making art which uses hope, love, positivity and solidarity as a radical show of defiance as we reimagine a better world for all. And we leave you with this poster, which is a perfect sentiment from anarchist printmaker Black Lodge Press. The anger that we all feel at the world is understandable, and we know that rage can make us feel hopeless sometimes. But when we express our anger with creativity, it does become activism, and activism, of course, is hope. So that's it, we're done. If anybody wants to ask a question, we can pass the microphone around. And we know that we've really raced through these slideshows, but we do have a list. If anybody wants, we can just let you have the list of the artists and the slides on there. So yeah, thanks so much for listening.
Thank you very much.